Hey guys, it's Yvette and I am starting the Fort Worth Fabric Studio Absolute Autumn Mystery Quilt. And this first video is going to be story of my life right here. Yep. Anyway, the first video is going to be all of the cutting instructions that we have received or that you will receive today, Monday, July, what is it going to be? I think it's the 27th. So anyway, you're going to receive that on Monday. Thankfully, you already have me and Kathy's Cute Creations who are going to be putting together these videos for you so that you can cut along with us, you can sew along with us, and so if you have any questions, hopefully they'll get answered by watching us do the cutting and the sewing with you. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so here I am with the cutting diagram that we were provided for fabric A. There is a lot of pieces to come out of fabric A, which is our background material. And the A material is called Muslin Mates in Cream. And so this is it. Okay, and I have already gone ahead and starched all my fabric before I'm going to cut it. I always do that. It is a preference of mine. You can starch if you want, or you don't have to. It's completely up to you. And I use Mary Ellen's Best Press whenever I starch my fabric. So that's all my A fabric. I'm going to kind of scooch it over a little bit and just show you that. So here's all my fabric, which I have. As I said, I've starched everything, and I went ahead and I labeled it with some alphabetties in all of the different letters. So I have each one, and I'll make sure that as I go through, you will be choosing the correct fabric, because I went through and I made sure that I was picking up the correct fabric and labeling it as I went. Okay, so I'm just kind of trying to move all of this over in the correct order so that I will go ahead and show you all of the cutting from A all the way through P, okay, because the Q is actually our backing, so there's not going to be any cutting on that. And as you all know, we don't have that yet. So even if you're getting the kit, you are not going to be able to get the backing for just a little bit because there's a little bit of back order on that. Okay, just moving that over. I probably should have done this before I started the video, but you know, I always have something to talk about. Or, you know, I really don't even have to have something to talk about, and I can just, you know, run my mouth the whole time. Okay, so obviously the hardest part, or the part that's going to take the longest, is not really hard, it's just the part that's going to take the longest, is our A fabric. Now, I'm pretty sure I've, you know, like 99.99999% sure that the instructions you're going to get are all updated, but I do know that when we were given the cutting instructions, there was one very small little mistake in the second strip, and that was when you were subcutting your 6.5 inch strip, which was the second pieces you were cutting. It said subcut 1 6 inch by 6 inch square. That is incorrect. It should read 1 6.5 inch by 6.5 inch square. Yours should be correct. Everything should be fine, but please just double check it just to make sure. Okay, so here we go. And also, I mean, I noticed that right here, it actually has the correct measurement. So if you are looking at the diagram, it also should have 6.5 inch by 6.5 inch. So double check there and double check here just to make sure that you're getting the correct size. If you happen to cut 6 inches square, I've been told that you'll still be able to finish it, because every time they give us instructions, it's really great. She always has us cut things or make things bigger, and then we cut them down to size. And I really appreciate that. And so it would still work, but it just is a lot easier if you start out with a 6.5 inch square. Okay, I've gone on and on and on for way too long about that particular piece, so let's get started. Okay, so here is our diagram, and I will keep it just off to the side a little bit so that I can keep an eyeball on it, and that's what we'll do. So let me scooch that, and then I'm going to take this and I'll scooch that, and all of our cutting will be width of fabric. Okay, so I have already folded my fabric so that it started out selvage to selvage, which is what you want it to be. Okay, I think I actually did a better job on this side. So you can see that I've got my selvages together, and then I folded it in half lengthways because you have 1.5 yards. I know you can't see this right now, but I'll just talk a little bit off the camera. And then I folded it again so that I'm going to have four fabrics deep, basically, right? So 4 layers, I should say. So I have 1, 2, and then 3, 4. So what I'm going to do is, as I cut, I will separate it. And this is how I do it. If you have a different method and you like it, then please stick to what you always do, because that's just fine. But I just want to make sure that I have my end of fabric together like so. And then when I do that, I will just sort of press it out with my hands to make sure that it's laying flat and doesn't have any buckles in it or anything like that. There's something under here. What is that? I'm like Princess and the Pea over here. Okay. And that's probably a good enough size for me to work with, because there are just, our first cut is like 3, and of course I've covered it up totally, 3 2.5 inch strips. Okay, that's our first cut, and this will be plenty. All right, so then I want to just sort of fold it over again. And y'all, I'm not even gonna look at the cat hair. I'm telling you, I am not gonna like do any taking away of cat hair until I am totally done, because I have cat hair all over the place. Thank goodness I keep this darn thing for myself. I'm telling you what. Okay, so the first cut I'm gonna do is to square this up. So just one sec. Okay, I still have all of my rulers in my bags from the retreat, so I'm going through them right now. Okay, so I'm going to incorporate my my squaring up with making my first cut. So I'm going to make sure that I have my 1/2 inch on this side, and I'll go 1, 2, 3. Oh, sorry, 2, because it's 2.5 inches. So we're going to be cutting right here on this line. And I can see that my ends are pretty much, let's see, how far in do we need to go? Okay, so in right there on probably the 34 is pretty close. So I'm going to give it a little bit of leeway though. And I'm just going to make sure that my 2.5 inch line, which is right here, is going to have some on the other side that's going to make up for what, you know, the thickness, and to make sure that we're getting a clean line. Okay, so we're ready to make our first cut. And on this very first one, I will now flip it around, and I'm going to make sure I get my 2.5 inch line right where I want it, and then I'm going to clean up, and I will have both sides clean. And you know that you've cleaned up properly if you pull your piece that you cut off and it's all one piece, which it is. So I'm gonna know I'm all cleaned up, and that's one piece. 2 pieces. And 3 pieces. All right, now I'm going to do my subcutting. So I will just set this aside because I will mess with all of the ends as I go. Each one I'll just I'm going to remeasure because it's just easier for me. If you have lots of space that you can have that piece of fabric laid out and waiting, perfect. Get it set and you'll be able to just start right where you go. I don't have that kind of space, so I'm just going to work with it one strip at a time. Okay, so now that we have this, we need to subcut 8 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangles. Okay, so we need 8 of those. Okay, and then our next subcut from these pieces, it is 28 2.5 inch squares. So I'm going to do those now. Okay, so I have those all subcut, and all of these pieces are going to be set aside for week 1. Now I'm going to have, in a certain part of my room that you won't see, unfortunately, I'm going to set up week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, so that I can have all of my weeks in a certain spot. And then what I do is I take those and I will put them in a Ziploc bag so that each week I have all of my fabrics that were cut for that week put inside. So let me just scooch this over for right now. Okay, and now we're doing our next strips. And I am just going to make sure that my selvages are lined up. Pretty good, doesn't have to be exact. We're just cutting small pieces at a time, so you don't have to go too crazy with it. And I will fold it over. Okay, our next cut is a 6.5 inch strip. So let me get a different ruler. Let's see. Okay. And I'm just going to go a little bit bigger so I can trim off over here, since I'm not able to keep it laid out. I know that I'm not exactly perfect every time, so I don't have to have a huge amount, but just some things that I can do some cleaning up. Okay. And I'll just flip that around and then put my 6.5 inch line right on the end there, which is right here. And then I'll trim off the excess. And there we go. Okay. So now we are going to subcut this into, I wish I had a highlighter. Let me see, I'll do this so that I know what part I've already done. It makes it easier if there's a visual of what I've already done. So I'm going to draw a line through it so that I know where I'm at. Okay, perfect. Much better. Okay, so this is going to be subcut into first one 6.5 inch square. And then the next thing I need is 4 5-inch squares. Okay. So let me just give this a press real quick. Okay, so these cuts are going to be for week 1. So I'm going to move those to my week 1 pile. And now we need 8 2.5 inch by 1.5 inch rectangles. Okay, these pieces, which again is 8 2.5 inch by 1.5 inch rectangles, these are going to be saved for week 2. Okay, I'm going to just save that piece. And now we're going to do another cut. This one actually looks okay already. I'm going to just leave it. Okay, so our next cut, let me go ahead and scratch this one off. I need 4 1.5 inch strips. Okay. Again, I'll make this one just a little bit bigger so that I can make sure I'm cleaning up that edge. Okay, so from these strips, I'm going to subcut 8 1.5 inch by 7.5 inch rectangles. Okay, so from the first strip, I'm going to get 8 1.5 inch by 7 inch rectangles. And then from the rest of these, I'm going to cut 8 1.5 inch by 5.5 inch rectangles. 8 1.5 inch by 5 inch rectangles. And I'm going to save all of these that I cut for week 2. So I'm going to give my camera a break for just a second, and I will cut all of these, subcut all of these guys, and come back for the next strip. Okay, so these are the pieces that we have cut out of our 1.5 inch strips. They have been subcut down into 8 1.5 inch by 8, is it 8 or 7? 7.5 inch rectangles. And then we have 8 1.5 inch by 5.5 inch rectangles. And 8 1.5 inch by 5 inch rectangles. And all of these are going to be saved for week 2. So let me just go and bring them over there. Okay, so next we are going to need 2 2.5 inch strips. And thankfully our piece of fabric is getting smaller. Okay. Okay. 2.5 inch strips. And I'm gonna cut there. I think I should get everything. Okay, and one more. All right, now we are going to subcut these into, first we're going to do 8 2.5 inch by 5.5 inch rectangles. So let's do that first. Okay, now we're also going to cut our subcut 8 2-inch squares. Okay, and the last thing we need to cut is 12 1.5 inch squares. And all of these that I cut are going to be for week 2. Okay guys, so here are all of the pieces that we need from those 2 2.5 inch strips. Again, that's 8 2.5 inch by 5.5 inch rectangles, 8 2-inch squares, and 12 1.5 inch squares. And these are all for week 2. I'll be right back with our next strip. Okay, so our next strip is a 5.5 inch strip. I'm just going to cut it right off there. Looks like it's all still even, so I'll just cut there. Okay, the first thing that we need to subcut is, and we want to make sure that we're doing this cut first. We are going to subcut a 5.5 inch square. Now we need 4 1.5 inch by 10.5 inch rectangles. And let's see here. 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Okay. So, and then it looks like we have some 1.5 inch here. So if I cut 1.5 inch twice, we should be good. Okay, so that means let me get the selvage off and then make it a little bit easier. Let me give this a quick press. Okay, let's see. Just going to put that like that. Fold it again. And we want 2 1.5 inch. Okay. And I'm gonna go just a little bit bigger so that I can make that a clean trim. And it looks like from the drawing that we'll have plenty to work with. Okay, that's one. And 2. And then it looks like this last row would be 1 3/4. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna put that aside for a second, and we are going to get 4 1.5 inch by 10.5 inch. Okay, and let me see, 4, and then we need 12 1.5 inch by, or 1.5 inch squares, 12 1.5 inch squares. Okay, and then finally, now all of those that I just cut, those are all for week 2. And now for week 3, I'm going to cut 19 1 3/4 inch squares. That's 19. Okay, so now we're on to our next cut, and we will need 5 1 3/4 strips. So let's get those done. Okay, now that we have those 5 strips, we are going to subcut 45 1 3/4 inch squares and 32 1 3/4 inch by 3 inch rectangles, and those are all for week 3. So let's do those first. Okay, so I have my subcuts of 45 1 3/4 inch squares. Oops, that's these. And then we have 32 of the 1 3/4 by 3 inch rectangles. These are all for week 3. So I will put those over with week 3 in just a moment. And the last thing that we're going to cut out of here is 8 1 1/2 inch squares. And we're going to save those 8 squares for week 2. Okay, so our next strip is 7 1/2 inches. So let's cut that. Okay. And now we're going to subcut 4 7 1/2 inch squares and 3 3 inch squares. And those are all for week 4. Okay, so I have my cuts. I'm going to go give them a quick press and come back with our last strips from our A fabric. Okay, so we are down to our last strip. I've done this one. And now we are going to cut 1 3 inch strip from this. So let's do that. 1 3 inch strip. Okay, and then we're going to subcut this into 13 3 inch squares, and those are for week 4. Okay, we need 13 of those. Okay, so I have the 13 3 inch squares cut. I'm going to save those for week 4, and when I come back we will start cutting up fabric B. Okay, so we're moving on to fabric B, and from fabric B we are going to subcut, or we're going to cut a 3 inch strip, and then we're going to cut 3 1 3/4 inch strips. So let's do that real quick. Okay, so now we're going to take the 3 inch strip first, and we're going to subcut this into 10 3 inch by 1 3/4 inch rectangles. Okay, so now we're going to take our 1 3/4 inch strips, and we are going to subcut first 16 1 3/4 inch squares. Okay. Okay, and with this last strip, we are going to subcut 6 1 3/4 inch by 3 inch rectangles. And all of these pieces that we've cut are going to be for week 3. Okay, so moving on to fabric C, we are going to cut 16 3 inch by 1 3/4 inch rectangles, all for week 3. Okay. Okay, here we are with fabric D, and we are going to cut this piece of fabric into 32 1 3/4 inch squares, and those are all for week 3. Okay, so we are moving on to fabric E, and the first thing I'm going to do is cut a 2.5 inch strip, and I'm going to take that strip and subcut it into 8 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangles for week 1. Okay, so now we are going to cut a 3-inch strip, and from the 3-inch strip we're going to subcut 4 3-inch squares for week 3 and 4 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangles for week 1 and 4 2.5 inch by 2 inch rectangles for week 2. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I have these cut. I'm going to put these aside for just a moment. And let's see, those were for week 1, and then these are week 1 as well. Let's put that in that pile. Okay, now we need 1 2-inch strip from this piece. And we are going to subcut this into 8 2-inch by 3.5 inch rectangles and 4 2-inch by 2.5 inch rectangles. And those are all saved for week 2. Okay. Okay, so now we are starting on our fabric F. The first thing we're going to do is cut 2 2.5 inch strips. Okay, so now that we have the 2 2.5 inch strips, we are going to subcut this into 8 2.5 inch by 8.5 inch rectangles, and we're going to save those for week 2. Okay, so now we need a 1.5 inch strip. And we are going to subcut that into 4 1.5 inch by 8.5 inch rectangles for week 1. Okay, now we need to cut a 3-inch strip from here. Okay, we're going to subcut this into 4 3-inch squares for week 3 and 8 1.5 inch squares for week 2. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to fabric G. The first thing we have to do before we do anything else is we have to cut a 6.5 inch square for week 1. Okay, so here is our 6.5 inch square that we needed to cut first. I'm going to put this aside for week 1. And the next thing we need to do is we are going to cut 16 3-inch by 1 3/4 inch rectangles for week 3. Okay, that's 16 of them. Let me get this a quick press. Okay, so let's subcut this even down to 3-inch by 1 3/4 inch rectangles, and we need 16 of them. Okay, here we go. Okay, on to fabric H. Here's our fabric H, and the first thing we want to do is cut a 5.5 inch square for week 2. Okay, here's our 5.5 inch square for week 2. Set that aside. And now we are going to cut 4 3-inch squares for week 3 and 8 2-inch squares for week 2. Okay, so moving on to fabric I, we are going to cut 4 2.5 inch by 3.5 inch rectangles for week 2, and we're cutting 4 3-inch squares for week 3. Okay. Okay, so out of our J fabric, we are going to cut 4 7.5 inch squares for week 4. Okay, from our K fabric, we are going to cut 2 7.5 inch squares for week 4. Okay, so with our L fabric, we are going to first cut 2 7.5 inch squares for week 4. And then we're going to cut let me go back. We're going to cut 4 2.5 inch squares for week 1. So that's 2 7.5 inch squares for week 4 and 4 2.5 inch squares for week 1. Okay, so here we are with our M fabric, and we are to cut 5 strips of 2.5 inch by width of fabric, and those are going to be for the binding. So we would save that for week 5, which is our finishing up. I think actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my Go cutter for those. They just come out a whole lot straighter, and inevitably when I cut these by hand, they're all squiggly. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the other stuff first. Actually, I could probably let me just put that on the thing right now, because I can do those real quick and then we can move on to the next step. Okay, so let's get back to our fabric M. I've just cut the binding. That's all I did so far. So now we are going to cut 12 1.5 inch by 10 inch rectangles for week 2 and 8 1.5 inch by 5 inch rectangles for week 2. Okay. Okay, so here we are with our in fabric, and we are going to cut 4 6.5 inch by 5.5 inch rectangles for week 2. Okay, so we are on our O fabric. We are going to cut 12 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangles and 4 2.5 inch squares for week 1. Okay, so we are finishing up with our P fabric, and I was incorrect earlier because this fabric is for the binding. So the other fabric must be a border of some kind. I'm not sure, but anyway, so now we're going to cut these. We're going to cut 6 strips of 6 2.5 inch by width of fabric strips and save it for the binding. Okay, so once again, I'm just going to use the Go Cutter. It's just a lot faster and actually way more accurate. so that's what I'm going to do. Okay. I should be able to cut this in half. Let me pull this up on here and just double check that, because then I could just do the whole thing is for the binding. So all right, so if I take this and I fold this in half, yeah, that looks good. Okay, so that's what I'm gonna do. I am just going to figure out, let's see, if I go from 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16. So I will do 8 inches. It just makes us get it a little bit more accurate. That's all. Okay. And of course I didn't go all the way down. Why did I not go all the way down? I don't know. This is all very good questions. Very good questions. Okay, so here's our finished binding, and I am going to save that for later. And okay, so guys, we have finished cutting all of our fabric, and now we are ready to start sewing. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for cutting with me.